On this, the yeas are 47, the nays are 53. The motion to discharge is not approved.
We are anonymous. No faces, no flags, no permission slips. Today's story is about one of those moments. A moment when the United States Congress had a chance to stop an illegal war, and instead many politicians chose loyalty to Donald Trump over loyalty to the Constitution. Here's what just happened. The United States Senate held a vote on a war powers resolution designed to block Donald Trump's ongoing war against Iran, unless Congress explicitly authorized it. The vote result was simple but stunning. 47 senators voted yes, and 53 voted no. The motion failed. That means the Senate refused to advance a measure that would have forced Trump to seek congressional approval before continuing military operations. In other words, the Senate essentially gave Trump a green light to keep fighting, a war that Congress never officially declared. Now let's look closely at that vote, because the details matter. The vote split largely along party lines. Most Republicans sided with Trump and voted against limiting his war powers. Only one Republican Senator, Rand Paul, of Kentucky, broke ranks and voted with Democrats to support the resolution. On the other side, there was one shocking defection. Democratic Senator John Fetterman of Pennsylvania voted with Republicans to oppose the resolution. So the final tally was 47 in favor of limiting Trump's war and 53 against it. The motion failed. The Senate refused to intervene, and the war continues. Let's be clear about something fundamental here. Under the United States Constitution, Congress, not the President, has the authority to declare war. That power is explicitly written in Article 1, Section 8. The executive branch is supposed to seek authorization from Congress before launching major military conflicts. That principle exists for a reason. The founders understood that kings and dictators often drag their countries into unnecessary wars. They wanted the decision to go to war to require debate, votes, and democratic accountability. But that is not what happened here. Instead, Donald Trump launched military operations against Iran first, and only afterward did Congress attempt to assert its authority. Critics say the strikes were carried out without any imminent threat to the United States, and without congressional authorization. In fact, Democrats and some Republicans warned that allowing the president to continue this conflict without approval sets a dangerous precedent. Any future president could start a war anywhere in the world without meaningful oversight. Yet the Senate still refused to stop it. And now the fight has moved to the House of Representatives, where a similar resolution was debated. But the outcome there mirrored the Senate. The House also rejected a measure aimed at forcing Trump to withdraw U.S. forces unless Congress approved the war. So in both chambers of Congress, efforts to restrain Trump's war powers failed. Why does this matter? Because the war itself is deeply unpopular. Public support for the conflict started at roughly 41%, which is shockingly low for the beginning of a war. Compare that to the Iraq War in 2003, which began with around 70% approval, before dropping to 42% years later. The Trump-Iran conflict started almost exactly where the Iraq War ended in terms of public support. That tells you something important. Americans are skeptical from the start. But instead of listening to the public, many MAGA politicians are pushing a different narrative. Their argument is basically this: the war has already begun, so stopping it now would be unpatriotic. Yes, that's actually the argument. Take Senator Susan Collins of Maine. She justified opposing the resolution by claiming that passing it would send the wrong message to Iran and undermine American troops. According to Collins, the priority now is to show unwavering support for the military. But critics say that logic is backwards. Supporting troops does not mean blindly supporting every war that politicians start. If anything, refusing to question a war puts those troops at greater risk, and some voices are saying exactly that. Veteran and Senate candidate Graham Plattner argued that this thinking is exactly what kept the United States stuck in Iraq for years. Wars continue not because they succeed, but because politicians are afraid to admit mistakes. In his words, the war had barely begun, and already politicians were acting as if stopping it would be impossible. That should sound familiar to anyone who remembers the last 20 years of Middle Eastern conflicts, and yet Donald Trump is doubling down. Reports indicate that Trump has been pressuring Republican lawmakers to block any vote that might restrict his military authority. The message from the Trump political machine is simple: vote against the War Powers Resolution, and you will be politically rewarded. House Speaker Mike Johnson echoed that message. He argued that passing a resolution to limit Trump's war powers would embolden America's enemies and weaken the military's ability to complete its mission. Critics say that argument is not only flawed, it's dangerous. Because if Congress refuses to debate or vote on wars simply because they have already started, then the constitutional power to declare war effectively disappears. And that brings us to one of the most important points raised during the debate. Representative Joaquin Castro asked a simple but devastating question. Why is the United States entering another Middle Eastern war at all? According to him, Secretary of State Marco Rubio admitted that Israel planned to strike Iran, which might have triggered retaliation against U.S. forces in the region. Instead of telling Israel to stand down, Trump decided to join the war. That decision raises a serious question. How exactly does that fit with Trump's long-running campaign slogan of America First? For the past 25 years, American service members and their families have already sacrificed through wars in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Libya. Now Trump is asking yet another generation to risk their lives in another conflict in the same region. And critics say there is no clear mission. Representative Jim McGovern made that point bluntly during the debate. He reminded Congress that nobody is defending Iran's government. Iran has long been accused of supporting terrorism and repressing its own people, but acknowledging that fact does not automatically justify war. McGovern asked why Trump, who campaigned on a promise not to send American troops into Middle Eastern wars, suddenly changed his position overnight. Republicans could not answer. Instead, many simply followed Trump's lead, switching from anti-war rhetoric to pro-war enthusiasm almost instantly. McGovern called the entire situation Iraq 2.0. He warned that the administration keeps changing its explanation for the war. First it was an imminent threat, then it was nuclear weapons, then it was regime change, then it was back to imminent threat again. And here's the most alarming part. Lawmakers who attended classified briefings reported that there was no evidence of an imminent Iranian attack against the United States. If that's true, then the central justification for launching the war collapses. Republican Congressman Thomas Massie, one of the few Republicans willing to challenge the administration, also criticized the war. He pointed out that the War Powers Resolution of 1973 allows the president to send troops into hostilities only under 3 conditions: a declaration of war, specific congressional authorization, or a national emergency caused by an attack on the United States. None of those conditions currently exist. Iran has not attacked the United States, Congress has not declared war, and Congress has not authorized the conflict. Yet the war continues. Massie also raised another critical issue: cost. The United States has already spent roughly $8 trillion on wars and regime change experiments in the Middle East over the past 2 decades. That money could have gone toward healthcare, housing, infrastructure, or education. Instead, billions more dollars may now be directed toward military operations in Iran. In fact, lawmakers are already discussing a supplemental funding package for the war, potentially around $50 billion. That money will not build homes. It will not lower grocery prices. It will not improve health care. It will buy missiles. And as the war expands, American service members are already dying. Reports confirm that multiple U.S. troops have been killed in the conflict so far. Families across America are now burying sons and daughters because of a war that Congress never formally approved. Meanwhile, the Trump administration still cannot provide a consistent explanation for why the war began in the first place. Even Trump's own spokesperson suggested that the president acted largely on instinct. When asked why the strikes happened when they did, the answer was essentially that Trump had a good feeling that Iran might attack American assets. A good feeling. That is apparently the strategic reasoning behind a war that could destabilize the entire Middle East. Some Republicans, like Senator Ron Johnson of Wisconsin, are framing the conflict as an opportunity for geopolitical change. They argue that Iran has been hostile to the United States for decades and that this moment could reshape the region. But critics say that kind of thinking ignores the lessons of recent history. The wars in Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, and Syria were all sold as opportunities to reshape geopolitics. Instead, they cost trillions of dollars, destabilized entire regions, and created new generations of extremists. Even some Democrats say the current administration seems to have no clear strategy, no timeline, and no defined end goal. Senator Mark Kelly summed it up bluntly. He said that if you randomly picked a group of people off the streets of Washington, D.C., they might actually do a better job making foreign policy decisions than the current administration. That statement sounds harsh, but given the chaos surrounding this war, many Americans are starting to agree. Because when a country goes to war without clear goals, without congressional approval, and without public support, the results are rarely good, and history proves it. So here we are, A president who launched a war without congressional approval. A Congress that failed to stop it. Politicians who claim patriotism while ignoring the Constitution. And American soldiers paying the price. We are anonymous. We believe citizens deserve the truth about what their governments do in their name. If you believe that war should never be started without accountability, if you believe the Constitution should matter more than political loyalty, and if you believe ordinary people deserve transparency from those in power, then share this story, because the more people understand what is happening, the harder it becomes for those in power to hide behind propaganda. Stay informed, stay skeptical, and never stop asking questions. Wars don't just happen. They are chosen, they are authorized, they are funded, and they are fought mostly by ordinary citizens, while powerful people argue on television. So here's the question every American should ask right now. Do you want another endless Middle East? War started without a clear mission, without congressional approval, and without public support, because that is exactly what Donald Trump and his allies appear ready to deliver. And history shows that once a war begins, stopping it becomes exponentially harder. We are anonymous. We believe power must be questioned. If you care about constitutional limits, about the lives of soldiers, and about the future of your country, do not stay silent. Pay attention to how your representatives vote. Demand accountability. Share the truth, because democracy only works when the public refuses to look away.